Dave,
Ian,
and Edward. Hello.
Howdy.
Everybody, we have a guest this afternoon, evening, whatever. We've tricked yet another person into coming on our show. Edward Niedermeyer, author and co-host of Autonocast. Welcome to Apex Adjacent.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you and sorry for coming on.
Real quick, off the top, I have to say, you are the first guest to ever drink out of just a straight up goblet on our show.
I mean, yeah, it's nothing bad. Sort of, I don't know. I thought it was kind of like a 70s kind of cup. I kind of thought it was cool. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Here I am with an IKEA glass like a freaking commoner.
Yeah, it would definitely look great next to like some Jello that was done in a bundt pan. Like that is the vibe of that dinner party glass. Yeah,
absolutely. I kind of have a soft spot for 70s stuff in the kitchen.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Well, I have wanted to have you on for a long time, as we were discussing before the show, and I'm happy that we finally made it happen, especially now because I think most people on the internet know you as an expert on all things Elon Musk, which what a thing to be an expert in. And you know, Tesla and kind of his journey through public life as a very public CEO. And now it seems like we're all going to have to be a little bit more concerned about that because ostensibly he's going to be involved in the day-to-day workings of our government. And so I wanted to have you on to kind of help us understand what we should expect from that.
Well, yeah. Well, so, I mean, I guess, yeah, like the weirdest thing about what's going on right now for me is that I've always considered myself, you know, writing about cars and sort of like emerging tech stuff. And you always know that it's like I'm not in the mainstream, right? Like the stuff that I'm interested in is not like, if anything, I'm trying to like help move it a little bit more towards the mainstream. And like with Elon Musk now, it's, I mean, I have been, you know, I really never wanted to cover him as a person. Like I really wanted to cover Tesla as a car company, and then as a technology company. And it's been basically impossible because everything is just about him, like always. And so the strangest thing I think about for me about where we are right now is that I've spent now, it's been almost a decade, excuse me. Yeah. Almost a decade. Feels like much longer than a decade. You know, paying quite a bit of attention to this guy's companies and then increasingly him. And I do kind of feel like for one of the first times ever, like everybody else is now going to have to kind of live in a version of my world, like my own kind of like relatively unique experience for the last decade. Hopefully, I know a lot of people have been sucked into the story already, and but you're just standing there like, welcome to hell. Honestly, it's you know, and I think it's hard to be too optimistic because again, you know, it's not just me, right? Like a lot of people have been aware of Musk's, you know, of what's behind the image, right? Like that was always the thing for me in the beginning was like, it was just this image and everyone just agreed this is who this guy is. And yet like the second you look past it, it didn't match up like immediately. And then it was like, you dig a little bit more and then it's like dramatically like everything is like black is white and up is down. Like as far as the gap between his image and sort of how he does things. And so, the real issue is that a lot of people have cottoned on to this. There's been a lot of actually good journalism and kind of nothing's happened. And so I fear, like my big fear is that my message to people has to be kind of like buckle up a little bit because it's going to be weird. And like, you're going to find out even worse stuff about him. I guarantee it. There's a lot more out there that we're all going to find out about him. And the really hard part of it all is that it's hard to believe that anything's ever going to happen.
Right. Because if anything, this country has a fantastic track record of holding shitty white dudes accountable for the shitty things that they've done, right? Like, I mean, yeah. Right?
And yeah, no, that's absolutely a factor in this. But also, like, this is a pretty unique case, too. Like at least in modern kind of hit. Certainly, like coming in from the auto industry, I think for me that like that not from the auto, but from covering the auto industry where bad things happen, right? So like, you know, I covered the auto bailout was my first big story. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that happened there that like most people have no idea about. The Toyota thing was the recall, the sort of scandal there was fascinating. Not as much of a scandal as people thought, but like a really interesting dynamic. The GM ignition recall though was like horrible. Like what happened there was, again, like people don't even understand how bad that really was. And the Takata thing, another case, really bad stuff happening. But in like the ignition and the Takata thing, there were some like specific cultural issues with specific companies, which is why it's, I think, for me, when my book about Tesla, Ludicrus, is really a lot about culture. It matters because it happens at scale. And the thing is, though, is that when you have a company that's like General Motors, a large company at that kind of scale, there's a sense of risk. Like it's a very different perspective than the startup perspective, right? And like that's what Elon, one of the things he's coasted on is this idea that, oh, we have a startup perspective, that's inherently better. Well, it's better in some way, right? Yeah, if you want to move fast, it's better in that ways, but like it's actually worse in some ways. And one of those really important ways is that old established companies have to they've learned to live with the regulators, right? Like and GM, like they've learned to live with unions, they've learned to live with regulators. And again, if the regulators are not good, they're underfunded, there's regulatory capture to some extent. Like there are problems with the system,
Sure.
But when someone came in and did something totally different, it's like the system didn't know what to do. And it's just like from the very beginning with Tesla has been unable to regulate them at the most basic levels. And Tesla has leveraged that for every inch that they could. And so it's like, that's one of the most, people are very cynical about big industrial American companies. I get it. Like I've been under that hood and it is a dirty place in a lot of ways. But what we've been seeing with Elon Musk and Tesla is really something fundamentally different because there's no sense of like, we're in this for the long term and we have to live with things. It's like cancer or something. It's like, we're just going to steamroll everything. And the extent to which he's been able to do that is scary. And again, like I would love to have a more hopeful message for your listeners, but like we're entering an unprecedented new step in all that. And I'm quite nervous about where it might go.
Well, and I do want to like put some of that into context too, because one thing that we've talked about on the show before, and actually we have a game themed on this topic later, is that there have been, the auto industry is sort of unique in that it does have a lot of like cult of personality around CEOs throughout its history, right? Like you'd be hard pressed to think of another industry where the CEOs or founders are so, they're so famous. Like, I think we both work in tech and there's a lot of very famous tech CEOs as well, but not to the extent that they're like household names that they are in the auto industry. And I don't think since, unless there was a founder like Enzo Ferrari or Henry Ford, that a car company has been so centered around one personality since that era. And I think part of it was, to your point, like Lee Iacocca was a huge, like larger than life figure in several car companies, he made changes to car companies, but they weren't like an extension of him. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like, there's a couple other great examples of that, but unless they're a founder, the companies are usually too big to influence. And I think you can see that difference between Tesla and Twitter, because Twitter was already an existing thing. And now his only choice is to like hollow it out.
Yeah. No. And I think, I think it's a lot of it is a product of scale, right? Mm. Like with small companies, you can have a really one person doing it all. But like the reason that Toyota changed the auto industry is because they realized at scale, you can only manage the scale and complexity of an auto company through culture. No one person, even with way more advanced technology than we have when the whole Toyota production system and everything was was come up with, we still don't have a level of control that has made that irrelevant. In some ways, it has enabled a company like Tesla to have almost no culture and to get very close to that. I mean, it does defy a lot of what we've thought about industrial companies, that Tesla's been able to get to the kind of scale that they have, while like not just not adopting, but like being actually hostile, like to just basic practices like Kanban. Like there was a great story many years ago about how Tesla people on the line were having to use these Kanban systems secretly because Elon wasn't supposed to know about it, because that's how Toyota does things and we do things different here. So, but you're absolutely right. I mean, Elon is a throwback. So, and people forget Detroit was the Silicon Valley of the 20th century. Like people forget that, right? Or they're sort of, right, like starting the late 19th century and going into the 20th century, like Detroit it played that role. It was not, and it wasn't just the economic center of America, the United States. It was also very culturally powerful. Like along with that economic power, it had cultural power. And, car companies were who showed a lot of the public what the future was going to look like, or at least introduce a lot of the tropes that we still have about what.
And I think like winning a war helps a lot with that, right? Like they're a huge part of the reason we won World War II, and actually the military ended up structuring itself after auto companies, right? Like Robert McNamara came from Ford and then was the Secretary of Defense afterwards.
Yeah, and yeah, so we've had, and car companies have kind of lost that, right? Like, so, and they matured, and that's kind of what happened. Right. And I think that's the difference here is that Silicon Valley doesn't have a great model for maturing. The model for maturity in Silicon Valley is you have enough money that you buy other startups, kind of, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, right. Just keep gobbling like Pac-Man style, like the Microsoft model, the Google model, right? Yeah.
Which, to be fair, is what we see in the car industry as well. And you do get a level of maturity there. And I think that Tesla is, again, this is why it really is, like in the historical sweep, a major outlier, is that it's worth, what, $1 trillion? I'm not looking, but like $1 trillion, give or take, with a few $100 billion between friends. And yet it is still revolving one person. There's not really, and there's not really a maturity glide path. I mean, certainly, like you look at Tesla right now as a business, you don't get the sense that they even really want to be in the car business anymore. Mm-hmm. Like they're not really investing in it the way you think they would be. They're certainly not investing in the product lineup in a way that would make sense to leverage the technology head start they have, the scale head start they have, the cost head start, like all of these advantages. They should be doubling that, right? Following basic industrial logic, they should be doubling down on these things, and they're not. They're really stalled out on the sort of core product side, and they're putting everything into this big, self-driving and AI, hype bubble. So that's what maturity looks like for a Tesla. That's what maturity looks like for $1 trillion company built around one person's ego. And again, I have been saying that this company seems, like it's going to have a hard time living up to all the expectations people are putting on it. I've been saying that since like 2016 or so, right. And look what a great job I have done. I don't know, but like it just seems like it keeps getting more and more obvious. And in theory, at some point, but theories about how like society and like our government and other kind of structures work don't seem to be holding up too well these days. So.
Yeah, there have been a lot of like really puzzling decisions that they've made. Especially, I think the one that was, I think the full self-driving thing is a topic that we've talked about a lot, and I know you've spent a lot of time talking about it as well. But I think it just bears repeating like what a colossal like waste of money that whole endeavor is, because it's just a bad use of the technology of AI and machine learning. But the thing that I think is most puzzling to me is the supercharger thing, right? Mm-hmm. Is hollowing out that side of the business when that was their one big advantage, right?
Yeah. And I think there may be some extent to it. And broadly speaking, this is sort of the problem with Tesla, right? Is that there's a difference between a sort of like clearing the prairie, sort of settler, sort of new frontier era, and again, just sort of a more mature era. What works in one, right? And it's like you can go back to the westerns of like, the guy who's like, riding the ranges and, oh, the town's getting too big and the railroad's coming and I gotta keep moving on, right? Like Elon is really that, that guy in so many ways.
Yeah.
So I mean, like again, like he just is ignored, right? The reason he's getting into politics is because he's just ignored the regulatory piece of it, and the reason he's gotten into full self-driving is because, again, he just hasn't built the culture and the operational what it takes to really manufacture affordable, EVs really at real scale. And so again, I just in every example, like this is the kind of model for what we see out of him. So.
Yeah.
So I often think of about Trent Reznor. I often just think about Trent Reznor. No, like
at the end of that sentence.
Understandable.
Right. Yeah. Who wouldn't? Right. Yeah. But oftentimes when Nine Inch Nails or Reznor was in the studio, there'd be, this could be urban myth, but like there would be a sheet of paper on the wall that was like no snares on 16th notes or no hi-hats on 16th notes, like all of these kinds of things that they just kind of wanted to avoid and kind of put parameters around like a different angle of their creativity. Right. And so do you feel like the way that the automotive industry has done things is like Elon's kind of like sheet of paper, and he's not doing those things just because it's part of the structure? And like just kind of like a contrarian attitude, or do you feel like that there have been benefits? I would hate to give him any credit for anything, but that there is like, oh no, we are not doing that because of this, and it being actually like a good thing, not like union busting or just something that furthers self-interest or selfishness, etc.
Yeah. So look, on a basic level, right, and I really tried to make this clear, right? Like in the book, I'm not saying Toyota is good and Tesla is bad.
Right.
It's and like you see cultures that are much more like Tesla's in the auto industry in your Ferraris, for example. Like there is a culture, right? But Ferrari also they've created sort of money printing opportunities. Porsche, I guess, would be sort of in between those. And Porsche is actually an interesting case because it shows to have that kind of positioning and that kind of culture in the auto industry, you still have to sell a lot of Macans, you know what I mean? Which are like a Volkswagen Tiguan with like a lot of nice parts and a lot of good suspension tuning and stuff, right? And more power, whatever. Like, so the auto industry is a place where if you want to make it in the long term, you have to make compromises. And like, that's why Elon Musk isn't becoming a major car company. It's not just a reflexive principle thing. It's because it involves compromise, and there are compromises that he doesn't want to make. Right? Okay. It's the same. Right? So again, I don't dispute that. Like the design of a lot of Teslas has been really nice. Over the years, people are like, yeah, but they just look fine. Buy it. Like if you just want, right? It's the same reason I would not recommend someone get like a vintage Alfa Romeo or whatever. Like I would never deny that your Montreal or whatever it is gorgeous and desirable, and like. I get the appeal of it, but like the reality is that cars are always this hub between the rational and the irrational, and that's true. That tug that people feel when they're buying a car exists. It's like a battle that is played. That's what's interesting about the auto industry to me is it's this war that goes on endlessly between people who are like passionate about the project and like accountants who are passionate about saving, half a cent on every car, because at 10 million units of scale, that means millions and millions and millions of dollars, right?
Right.
And it's like whatever it is that you do, whether you're a writer or a podcast, whatever it is you do, there's some balance between doing the thing that you want to be doing and doing what you have to do to sort of get by. And like, cars are a hard place to grasp that because like it's one of the most extreme contrasts between extreme rationality that it takes to run a 10 million unit industry that has global supply chains, and like just the level of scale and complexity is just unbelievable. But at the same time, you have to make that work with like something that moves people emotionally, or people connected emotionally, and whatever it is that you do, people are going to have some kind of emotional reaction to it on some level. And like that's what makes it fascinating. And to me, like Elon's whole thing, it kind of cheapens it all, because it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy that, oh, you just put everything into making the product look and feel a certain way, and it's all going to just work. It doesn't all work itself out. Your quality is shit because you don't make compromises, right? Like your supplier relations are shit because you don't make compromises. Your service is horrendous because you don't make compromises. Like there is always a price, and I think that this is where Elon's a conceit of being an engineer is so like completely revealed, is because engineering is all about compromises, and his whole shtick is you don't have to make them.
Yeah. Well, and I think, go ahead, Dave. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to contrast that with what we go through on the buyer level, because I think that like that it's so like, as automotive enthusiasts, I've never thought about it in this perspective before, but you hit it on the head. From the buyer's perspective, I am trying to make the most irrational decision that I can rationally make as the buyer, right? And I feel like that's like, if I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy this used Lexus LS 460 because I have, right? And it has a V8, and so it's a little irrational. I could be making a more rational decision, right? Yeah. So I'm going to squeeze just a couple little irrational things in here because, I like that 30 Rock quote of like Tracy Morgan being like, like I have 2 ears and a heart, don't I? Right? Like I have emotions, I have this connection. Like it's okay for me as a buyer to make that kind of like that decision. But when you have like a system that is making that decision, a massive multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar system making like those irrational decisions, like as much as they possibly can, then everyone suffers all the way down to the buyer, right?
Well, again, there's trade-offs, right? Like, and to me, the question is, right, like what is people respond so much on it. So like, to take the Tesla example, they respond on this really deep emotional level to the idea that this car feels more like a smartphone than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And like that, to me, it's like what's emotional about that? It's not like a classic car emotion thing, but what's emotional about it is, or irrational at least, let's say, is the idea that what's good for a smartphone is actually good for a car. Like cars and smartphones are very different in many ways. And if you really sit down and kind of break it all out, like the developers and designers and makers of smartphones and of cars have very different priorities, right? And the buyers and the consumers, right? Like you will take, and this is why Toyota is like such a fascinating example, is that they're like the anti-Tesla. They've never had the sexiest cars. Like for the most part, I mean, like 2000 GT. You can talk about, there are sexy. I like the third gen MR2 or whatever. But they've never had the most cutting edge technology, right? And it's because they've done well, both as how they run their company and how they appeal to consumers, traditionally at least. They've really leaned into the fact that, for most people, this is a way to get around. Now, that marketing worked really well when the alternative was Detroit, that was chrome and bling and this and that, and they had 80% market share that Toyota could just come in and just eat, right? We're in a very different era now, and like people take the level of quality that people take for granted in the auto industry is insane, right? And now increasingly, even your Toyota has to have all these styling and design and these other things just to sort of keep up and not look ultra stodgy, because even Toyota can't afford to be like, well, we may be stodgy, but we're more reliable, because really at this point, the differences are no longer as big as they used to be.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot too is that, this idea of compromises and, Elon's like pie in the sky vision, and then the reality the kind of the difference between those two. The most illustrative example of that is the Cybertruck, right? Because, and it also, I think, shows what is going to be a failure for him when he gets involved in government, because despite his best efforts, there is some amazing like engineering feats that his employees pulled off to make the Cybertruck
well put, yeah,
right, like to make the Cybertruck a thing.
Yeah,
and I think that's why I always have a hard time with this of like, you know, I have a pretty clear idea about who Elon Musk is a person and the quality of his ideas and character and stuff. But I think the full accounting of like his impact of the stuff that has come out into the world because of, you know, mostly his resources and some of his idealism is harder to reckon with. But I think a lot of it has to do with just resources. And if he's in a position in this government role where he's really only able to take resources away and not add anything, I don't know what value he then brings, right?
That's a really good point. And kind of to get back, I mean, we're kind of circling back to the question we started here, which is what can we expect?
Yeah.
I kind of led us away astray.
No, that's great.
No, yeah.
No, I mean, I think if you read, Character Limit or Hardcore, what's the by Zoe, one of the books about the Twitter takeover.
Oh, okay.
Like that's what it's going to be, right? And like if you look at how he does things on X, the Everything app, I think you can get a sense between those two things of what this is going to look like. He has, his they refer to it at Twitter, they call them the goons. He's got these guys who are just like, right, and like if you've been on the internet at all, especially around car circles, like you've come across Tesla fanboys. I mean, if you have a fascination for the bizarre and the obscene, you may realize that there's these weird like hierarchies and stuff. And then over the years, there's been interesting shifts in politics and all kinds of stuff. But like this is right, like Elon has always sort of pulled this like group of loyalists around him, and there's always been this ladder of like climbing over everyone else to like ingratiate yourself sort of to Elon more. And then and like part of what that is and part of what the whole image thing does, the all of his hype and posturing and everything, it's not just to like raise money or to scare off regulators or whatever else, all the other things that it is for. Probably one of the most important things it does is bring in talent. Right. And so he is kind of constantly surrounded by people who are, and by the time they get to him, it may not even be the smartest or the best, but it's the most motivated people, right? Those are the people who get close to Elon. And so, with Twitter, I mean, that's right. He can't do everything himself. And when he does get personally involved, most of the time his head is up his ass. I'll just say it. Like that's right. Like in the way that, again, you just see on Twitter, like he just doesn't know anywhere near as much as he thinks he does. And so he relies really heavily on his bros, like his squad. And so that's what we're going to see, right? It's going to be, but those people also, again, they're not selected for their raw intelligence, let alone their aptitude for what they're going into, because it's the same damn people. The Steve Davis guy is the president of the Boring Company. Like, he was the sort of one of the main guys who came in and just sort of handled everything at Twitter. And it was like he was popping up in all of these different things. Why? Well, it's because he's loyal to Elon. Right. And now, of course, he's being mentioned, in connection with this whole Doge thing, Antonio Gracias, whatever. It's like it's all the same people over the years. You're like these guys. And again, it's that's what it's about. It's about loyalty, and and I think that what we've seen kind of at a broad level, and there's similarities with Trump here, obviously. We don't have to get into politics, but like building loyalty and building an image, right? Like we're in an era where the world is so complicated, and like the systems of government and society are like not working the way they were sort of supposed. We were all sort of raised to kind of believe they would, and what's happening is we're reverting to an era where personal loyalty it's like a form of sort of feudalism, and Elon Musk is way ahead of the curve on that game. Like if that is where things are going, and that's just what it feels like to me personally. Maybe I've been staring at Elon too long, and I'm cynical, but that's kind of how I see what's happening. And so I think absolutely, you know, and the ultimate tension there, it's the classic dictator's dilemma, which is that, you know, if you only index for loyalty, right, like you are surrounded ultimately by idiots. Like you are just trying to find people whose only instinct is to backstab everyone else and ingratiate themselves to you. And so we should absolutely expect his ideas about what to do with government to be terrible and to be super unpopular. So like, I guess if there's the happy note for your audience, is like, that's what we can look forward to is such hideously bad ideas probably implemented so poorly that it will, you know, further stoke, I think, you know, sort of people's the trajectory that Elon's image is taking, let's put it that way, and who knows what the implications for the broader sort of political scenario might be.
Yeah. Do you have fear? Do you have fear around kind of like, yes, there are going to be horrible decisions made. There are going to be negative consequences, but like, do you have a fear around this being that we basically live in a post-truth society, right? Where like these consequences will be spun, the cult of personality will continue to believe, like, not to get like overly pessimistic and stuff like that, but like my faith is eroded in so many things. Like I've completely detached from the news. Like I can't even like subject myself to these kinds of cycles anymore because it seems like the accountability and the consequences that you feel like should be happening never do, because things are just like, nobody believes anything other than what they want anymore.
I mean, yeah, yes, like that is right. I mean, we're going to find out, right? Is there, because yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not, if I were really confident that things getting worse are going to make things better, I would be figuring out some kind of accelerationist strategy. I'm not an accelerationist. I don't want to make things worse in order to make things better. I would really prefer that we just stop, take a deep breath, like reconnect with reality and start making better decisions. The sooner the better. So yeah, but I mean, I can't tell you, I really hope, you know, and so like I'm working on another book because I hope that more information will help people see the situation for what it is. So I haven't lost faith. And I think that, you know, it's probably more important than ever that people find faith that they didn't have before in order to try, and maybe not faith in what exists and like sort of the established ways of doing things, but like some faith that we can find a way through what seems to be an otherwise like very, very grim trajectory.
No, yeah. That's good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. We all need that. I needed that, Ed. Thank you. Yeah, we always say that this show is like half therapy, half car poop jokes, you know, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but no, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I, you know, like I said, what that's going to be like, I know what I can do, right? So like I'm writing a book about what Tesla's doing in self-driving because I know that I can explain that to more people than most people, or almost anyone.
Sure.
I think it's just something I put a lot of thought into, and not just understanding about how to make it something that can be sort of more easily understood. So like you know, that for me, that's what I'm putting my hope in, that maybe will make some kind of difference. Like it very much, like I put a lot of hope into a book and had it not make as much a difference as I thought it would, but it's not something we can do it again. So,
but that, yeah, we can't hold ourselves back. Like, you know, like thinking that it's not going to land the exact way we want it to, right? Yeah, nobody would make anything, right?
And to be clear, like in 2019, I was super like under no illusions that it was way too early for this book. Like I knew that people were not ready, you know, to hear the reality of what was going on. And honestly, if the book had come out in 2022, if I'd just taken, it's hard to think about it in those terms. If I'd taken 2 extra years, the timing would have been a lot better. But you know,
hey, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, no, yeah. So your book came out in 2019.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know, the book is Ludicrus. Yeah. The Unvarnished story of Tesla. Yeah. Yeah. Highly recommend it for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It definitely took a bit out of me. And
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I have one last kind of question on this topic before we move on and do something more fun. And that is, so I don't think it's super useful usually. Here, I'm just going to undercut my question right away. To try to like parse, especially with Trump and his whole orbit of trying to parse, someone's true feelings in their heart versus, how amoral are they, and they're just trying to do that. But I do think this situation is a little bit different because Elon, we've been talking a lot about Tesla and Twitter, but I mean, there's also SpaceX, which is probably, as far as federal government stuff is concerned, probably the most kind of, front of mind.
Yeah.
What mix do you think, and I think you mentioned something earlier, like about, I think he probably does fall in the category of accelerationist, or at least he has some of those tendencies, like with his personal politics.
Yeah.
But what percentage mix do you think this whole thing is self-dealing, amoral, just seeing an opportunity versus an axe to grind? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that, like, my answer is different every day. So, and I think it just look. I think I recently listened to an interview with Elon Musk's dad, and it kind of got me really sort of looking more at where he comes from, and like. So, one of the things his dad said in this episode was, that Elon sort of had to pretend, or at least had to be a Democrat sort of in the U.S. because as a white South African, like, you have to. Very interesting thing, and I think it opens up what was he before, and the reality is we don't know. Like, we don't know. We can certainly conjecture. We could look at some of the evidence and I think, to me, most of that evidence suggests he's probably, what we're seeing now is closer to sort of what he really believes. I
think a lot of that too in recent years, like with his such deep concern about collapsing birth rates, for, let's be honest, white people, I think that's probably the most telling for what falls out of his head. Because that seems to be the one thing he actually cares about.
A million years ago, I remember someone, and it's embarrassing. I mean, it's so many years I've been hearing people say different things, but like, there was something about how, like, the Mars colony, like, that Elon had some, and this was someone who, like, kind of knew him, and again, I can't tell you the source right now. I literally can't remember, but here it is anyway.
Yeah.
But someone said this, that the Mars thing, that who was going to be invited to Mars was sort of like fundamental to that whole idea.
Interesting.
And at the time, there've been a number of these things. There was someone else who I absolutely remember, but I can't name them here, who told me, but again, someone worked closely with them. And this person basically said, look, like, I'm an old school Silicon Valley, because I was coming, I was like, Silicon Valley versus Detroit culture. Like, how, this is the book I'm writing. Like, this person was like, Elon Musk is not a Silicon Valley guy. He's like, I've been a Silicon Valley guy for a really long time. And this was, you can imagine, in 2018, 17, something like that. It was actually, it was probably like 2017. He's like, Elon Musk is not a Silicon Valley guy. He's like, Silicon Valley cultures are flat. We're all collaborative. We don't have ego trips. Elon Musk is a South African, and he wants to run things like a slave plantation. This person literally said this. Wow. And these are the kinds of things that, like, back then I was like, this is interesting, but I don't want to get into the Elon stuff. I just want to talk about this as a car company. I don't want to, you know what I mean? And like, in part because I was under this feeling that, like, it would taint it, right? That, like, I had to be kind of more objective than that.
Right.
But part of it was, just, I couldn't be inflammatory. If people don't understand, like, when you wrote a critical book about Tesla in 2019, like, you had to pick your battles. Like, people thought I was, like, throwing the kitchen sink. Like, I left a lot of stuff out, because they couldn't get it past legal, and things like that. Like it had to be bulletproof because Litu's billionaire.
Sure.
But so anyway, so all this to say, I mean, I do think that Elon on a fundamental level is I think he's a conservative person, but I think it's sort of got this South African settler mindset. And if you look at it, right, like he made his money on like when the internet was like a colony that was, or like empty land, like his dad was talking about South Africa, it was all empty land. They just like needed people to show up and like make it work. And like Elon's big ideas were, what if the white pages were on the internet? And what if money were on the internet? And like,
right.
Yeah, yes. Okay, like not bad ideas fundamentally, but like it was the timing. He was there at the right time. And so,
and the resources, right? Because they weren't PayPal was not the only game in town even at that point. I think we're old enough to remember that. So they happened to win.
Yeah. At the same time, so I think Elon, like I think there's a through line here of this sort of South African settler mindset kind of thing, if you follow me.
Yeah.
That said, I don't want to discount the fact that this is very clearly an incredibly self-interest interested move into politics. He's getting into and I wrote a little bit about this on my blog, Niedermeyer.io. People forget he was an Obama guy.
Mm-hmm.
And the Obama deal was, and again, this is implicit. I'm not accusing anyone of any like explicit quid pro quo, but like looking back historically, it was pretty clearly like Obama took a very light touch regulatorily with Tesla. And again, like Mitso's super under, resourced and all that. But it was because he, right? Like all Obama had to say was put $7,500 on the hood of a car that everyone wants to buy anyway. And like, we're going to magically have affordable EVs, it's all because of Elon. And It was just like a really easy, I don't blame Obama for doing that because he had so much on his plate that like, to some extent, it's sort of like, oh, okay, this gives me a political win and all I have, and he didn't realize that Elon was, is who he is. So anyway, the Trump administration, of course, like the relationship was worse actually between Elon and Trump in the first administration. But for Trump, it was like the impunity was the point. And so, and that was really when Elon started, when Tesla, when his companies really started, to me, as far as I can tell, really like ramping up the just sort of like the law doesn't exist. We're just going to play Calvin ball. And like if and when the consequences ever catch up to us, we'll deal with it then. Like there was always some of that Silicon Valley disrespect for the system, but like it really in that second Trump administration, I think he must have realized like, oh, game on, like, right? Like why, and he was, Tesla almost went bankrupt multiple times in that time as well. He was on such a tight wire. Of course, you can just say, let's keep the factories running and we'll even though the pollution control system on the paint factory or the paint shop isn't working, we'll just do it anyway. And it was fine. It was only under the Biden administration that there started to be the possibility of real consequences. And that was mostly around like autopilot and full self-driving, the standing general order to start collecting data around that stuff, showing that, by the way, Tesla had a problem that radically out of step with the rest of the industry, and a number of other from the SEC thing, and then not inviting him to the White House, which I think is wildly overblown. He didn't do it because also Biden had a lot of labor people in his cabinet, and Elon's relationship with organized labor and with workers, regardless of they're not organized at all, was terrible. So Biden had every excuse to not invite him. But that was the first time that Elon wasn't sort of cosseted in the warm embrace of a friendly or at least totally apathetic to his law-breaking administration. And so that is 100% why he's involved in politics. He's terrified that under Kamala Harris, not only with the Biden era stuff, which it's unforgivable that the autopilot and full self-driving stuff, years and years and years, that they did not bring this investigation's conclusion is really a major red mark for me, and that they had no excuse. But Harris was going to bring that forward, and Elon said, "It's one of the only things I've agreed with him in a long time." He said, "I'm going to prison if she gets elected." I think he was right about that. I think he was right to worry about that, but not because of political. It was because the consequences were finally catching up. So I think there's a mix of the two. I think that Elon is absolutely has some ideological things. I think he has very self-interested motivations going into all this. And then there's a whole realm of like all of his dealings with foreign governments that I'm just like, that is so far beyond what I can even think. That's got way too much with all this other stuff to even begin to handle on. So I think there may well possibly be something going on there, but I'm not gonna to get into that. So there's like definitely a mix of things going on.
Yeah, well, and I do think it's telling too that he's explicitly not working for the government, right? It's like a non-government office that's going to be like an advisory council or whatever, and will be producing recommendations, I guess. Sounds pretty inefficient to me. I don't know. There's two heads of it, so
I don't think he can. I don't know that Elon Musk has security clearance. I don't know that he can pass a background test.
Well, that was going to be
it's kind of an unspoken thing I think there are some journalists looking into this. So hopefully I'm not.
I don't think.
But I don't think he could if he wanted to. Right? Like I don't think he could be a part of the government if he wanted to. And even if he were, I think even Trump's people understand that like this is a tricky relationship for them because Elon does not like Elon's whole thing is not following anybody's rules. And so the idea that like he can be controlled is goofy. And so for that reason alone, that explains why they keep him out of government.
Do you think him and Vivek make it to Inauguration Day? Do you think that this whole construct or like the egos involved just all too big and the ideas too dumb even for a second Trump administration? Like, will it implode before Inauguration Day? I think that's what I've been trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think they make it. I'll go on the record and say I think they make it to Inauguration Day. I think they make it beyond. I would say whether they get it through the first year is maybe an interesting question. But they definitely make it through. Look, I think again, this is why for me, the interesting thing about both Elon and Trump is that they can spin everything and they can keep their faithful sort of on board about a lot of things, but they still when the vibe gets off in a major way, it gets to both of them and it throws them off their game. And so, I think they're going to mess with stuff that they shouldn't mess with, and that it's going to create. And I think it's really when people really get mad. And I think, you're seeing people already, even before inauguration. I mean, just today online, the reaction to a healthcare CEO getting shot on the street in New York. I mean, it's pretty shocking to see people posting on LinkedIn being like, I work in the healthcare industry. And like, it's just like not people, but like, there's like things are in a very, heated place, and they're going to get more heated. And I think, and I think it's inevitable that these guys are going to do stuff that's unpopular. And I think it's going to have to get to that point where some of the blowback starts a little bit, and it may not take long. Given the temperature in the country, it may not take long for that blowback to start. But I think it's gonna when they start needing someone to blame. That's right. Well, and I think it'll get interesting.
I think you're right in that the talent that they share is they have some of the best fingers in the wind in the business, right? Like they can play, they know what plays in the room.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's Trump's whole thing, right? Is that he has to go to those rallies because that's how he knows what plays in the room. And I think Elon has a lot of that as well, because, obviously he knew when to pivot from being a Obama Democrat to, a super Trump guy. So I think you're right in that aspect. I'm just wondering how the person with actual power, Trump, is going to react to Elon mucking around in his pool and also trying to ride that same wave,
Yeah, and that's really the thing that's going to drive it, is that Elon is really actually in the lose-lose position, because if he does too much, Trump will need to take credit for it.
Yeah.
Because if he does too much that's bad, then he'll be the bad guy. If he does too much that's good, then Trump will take credit for it.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't do anything, well, then what the hell did you do? Right? Like he has to. And again, even if nobody else is like, even if reporters are calling Elon Musk up and being like, why, or adding him on the everything app, like it's going to bother him that he didn't do something. Like he's going to need some signature thing, and I think he's going to need it pretty quick. And I think what that thing is, and finding the thing that works for him, but also works for Trump, but also doesn't cost money, that cuts. Like, again, these are all factors that make me suspect that whatever it is they're going to do, it's going to be bad, but also might be kind of big and bad. And so again, that's kind of how I see sort of generally like this thing starting to break up, is that something kind of, they get forced into something kind of big and bad, or like there's just narcissists with a no-win situation, you know, is just something bad is going to happen. But again, it's going to take, people need to not like get complacent about this, because the thing is too, is that Elon is an idiot in a lot of ways, right? As are we all. Like, and I should be clear, like, I'm an idiot in a lot of ways too. But like, I'm also not trying to like take a chainsaw to the federal government. But he's an idiot, but he's not like a complete, right? Like he's this close to a level of power, right? His whole thing has been, right, like always raising the stakes. And again, this is one of the things why it's not just about Elon's relationship with Trump or with Vivek or with anybody else. It's for me, it's about Elon's trajectory, because it depends on always raising the stakes. And like, I, silly me, thought that, you know, your Tesla is going to be able to drive itself everywhere and like earn enough money to pay itself off. Like for me, that was like, okay, there's nowhere to go from there. All right. So I was wrong about that. Turns out, you know, we're going to create a race of robots that's going to like, you know, mean an end to scarcity. And like we have found ways to go, but it can only go so far. And right now, for the first time, Elon is looking at a ceiling, which is, if I go above this, Trump will either be mad or will insist on taking credit. And like, he hasn't really had something like that. And again, his whole thing depends, it's really important to understand, his whole thing depends on always raising the stakes. You can't just go sideways.
Right.
You can for a little while and kind of like fake it, but ultimately you always, when things get tight, you always have to raise the stakes a little bit more. And at some point, where does he go from here? You know, even if everything goes perfectly in the Trump administration, then what? Where does he go from here? It's just unsustainable. And I know I've been saying this since 2015, but it's going to happen at some point.
Do you envision, like, let's say that there is something that Elon does that Trump takes credit for, right? So this kind of like this unchecked narcissism, like conflict, right? Like the Trump fanboys and the cult of Trump and the cult of Elon folks, like being at odds with each other, because it sounds like the dumbest civil war that could ever take place in the history, the multiverse, anything. Yeah. And so I think the other thing to keep in mind in all of this is also that I think people are underestimating, and it's hard to quantify how much Elon did swing the election. I think he had probably a pretty significant effect, and the best evidence for that, not being someone who's deep in the polling data and all that, is just the fact that Trump is going around telling people, get in line or I'm going to have Elon pay to primary you. Yeah. Like that to me. And so again, that's the part of the relationship that's scary, is because it's like, oh, Trump does kind of need Elon a little bit. You know what I mean? Or at least the threat of him for at least some point. Like, again, I don't think that's not enough to carry them over the long haul. You know, sure. and again, there will be blood. Yeah, I definitely would advise people not to expect it too terribly soon, because I've seen a lot of that around, and I get it. Like, but again, this is when you know, to the beginning of this conversation, the whole welcome to my world thing. Like, the thing that I've learned is, just because something is inevitable doesn't mean it can't be stretched out way longer than you ever thought possible. Right.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
So like from a therapeutic standpoint, they do not have attachment methods that form healthy relationships or bonds.
They very much don't. No, in fact, that's been one of the big things about the Elon thing. That again, you follow someone like this, and you question yourself and what you're seeing and all these sorts of things, but you kind of come back to certain things. And one of them is that, like, Elon's whole dynamic with his source of power, his fan base, it's deeply unhealthy. Like, they need him to constantly escalate the odds, and he needs their adulation. And it's a codependent, if you had addiction, codependence in your family, like you recognize those patterns. And one of the quotes that I used in the book in Ludicrus was from Bertolt Brecht, it's like, sorry, the land that needs a hero. Like, if you need a hero, why? Like, people don't stop and ask, why do I need Elon Musk to so badly to reconcile? And again, I think this is where we've got a lot of people, is like this ability to say that environmentalism and capitalism are just like completely copacetic and they can just work together fine and just don't worry about it. And like this cool car that you can't afford is going to lead, you know what I mean? Like, right. I get why people wanted to believe that. And the problem is that telling people the hard truth, which I and just to be clear, like, I don't know that, like, anyway, I don't want to get too philosophical about it. Like, making capitalism and the environment work in a sustainable way to the extent that is possible is hard and complicated, and it's just never going to be, resonant in the way that this lie is. So
it's full of compromise, right?
It is full, exactly. Yep.
See what you did there, Dave.
Yep.
See what you did there.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, again, look around. You see society and like certain politics are polarizing. People culturally were polarizing, and it's because people want to go to their, have their, don't want to deal with the messiness of compromise, and it's really especially unfortunate because in theory the internet could be a way to facilitate greater compromise than as a species we've ever been able to do before. And I think certainly growing up, becoming aware of the internet as a kid, that was what I hoped for it. And so, again, we were talking before we started recording about Blue Sky. I mean, it is cool to see finally some things happening. I think that the people moving away from X, it makes me feel really good, like in my heart, that like maybe people can start to use the internet in a better way. I think Blue Sky is fundamentally better in a bunch of ways. And so maybe maybe there's some hope.
This is a world where Betamax is actually winning.
Well, and I think it's also I think the source of optimism for me is a lot of people saying, fuck it, we'll do it ourselves, right? Where all of the institutions and big companies have all let us down. And you see things like The Onion and and Blue Sky and, some other open source projects and just like employee owned media stuff like Defector and stuff like that.
Yep, 404. Yep.
Yeah, 404 is a great example. Like being successful and important right away. So I think that's my source of optimism, is that people are looking around and seeing a bunch of smoldering ashes and just being like, well, we'll have to rebuild.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say real quick, never underestimate nerds with free time.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, Twitter, if you love Twitter, seeing what happened to it is a really important lesson. It's something that, no amount of theory is going to open people's minds to the dangers of having a billionaire control fundamental infrastructure. So unfortunately, this is a lesson we're learning way too late. Too few people have learned it too late to prevent that same billionaire from now potentially colonizing our government. To some extent, right? To an extent that we'll see. But I think people have learned the lesson. They are learning that lesson, and I think Blue Sky is moving there. Shows that you get that like on a fundamental level, that is not infrastructure that someone can just swoop in and buy.
Yeah. And
I think whatever else may be happening, and it's probably going to be a grim few years and maybe even longer. But I think that again, I believe in the internet on a basic level, at least the potential of it, and I think some of these things that you're describing show that maybe we can rebuild community from there in a way that moves us in again. Because, again, it's not about just, if the institutions that were supposed to prevent some of this stuff from happening have failed, then maybe, we shouldn't necessarily just have faith in that. Maybe we need to figure out what the new institutions are that allow us to govern ourselves in an equitable way in this new era that we're living in. Maybe we just have to figure it out the way people did a few hundred years ago and before that, since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good transition because we've built something on our show, very small, but Dave invented a game, which is a license plate game, and we take shots of cars. Yep, we take shots of cars and with vanity license plates, and we block out the text, and then we give you the text for 3 cars, and you have to match the text of the vanity plate to the car.
I love it.
This really rewards gross generalizations about people.
Yeah,
like
car stereotypes are so much fun.
Yeah. You'll do well here.
Before we start, what is the license plate behind you? And what is your history with vanity license plates?
So 2 separate questions. So these license plates behind me, they're actually from the state of Nevada. So the state of Nevada in really early, like 2014 or something, decided that autonomous vehicles are going to be here any minute now. And they created license plates just for autonomous vehicles. And so one of them, so the red one, was actually on an actual test vehicle that operated in Vegas and in Nevada. I don't know more about the history. I don't know which company or anything. I bought it on eBay. The other one is, and it's for fleet-owned autonomous vehicles. The green one is for privately owned autonomous vehicles, which is even more like absurdly. And again, I keep it. I have a little collection of artifacts of sort of like anticipating autonomous vehicles like way too early. And these license plates are just some of my favorite.
Interesting.
The other question was my history. I had never had a vanity plate until very recently, just this year actually. There's a bot on Blue Sky that posts Oregon like license plates that have become registered or have become available. And there was one really, and it was like, I don't know, it was like really early when I first got to Blue Sky, which was like, April of 22 or something like that. Like quite early, and there was like nothing happening. And this bot was like pretty early on one of the only things in my feed, I guess. I don't know. It was just like showed up pretty regularly in my feed. I developed a relationship with this bot feed. There was just, I just saw one that said clowns, and I was like, oh, haha, I'll retweet that. Like it's a funny license, but I probably made some joke or something, and I was like, well, I have a Z3 M Coupe, BMW Z3 M Coupe, a clown shoe, and so I was like, well, wait a second. Like, life has shown me this clown's license. So anyway, I have a license plate on my Z3 M Coupe that says clowns on it. So
hell yeah,
that's fantastic. Okay,
that's the only clown I'm not afraid of.
Yeah, people say, well, why did you get clown? And I was like, have you ever seen just one clown in a car? didn't think about that, did you?
Right? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Let me go ahead and share the browser with this picture. I have not seen this, so you and I both can form our own guesses. We can team up, whatever you want to do here. So here we go.
So the title of this one is not the superhero we need or deserve. So go ahead and talk the people through what you're seeing.
Okay, so on the top we have a red WRX with so the 3 plates are Avenger, Batmobile, and Spidey. So we got like a superhero theme. Clearly, we've got a red WRX sedan with the hatch open, and a bike sticking out the back, or the trunk open. Bike sticking out the back. We have a Mercedes, a silver Mercedes. Is that the?
It's a C. I believe that's a C. 63.
A C63. Okay.
Yeah. AMG coupe. Yeah.
Okay. And then with the bottom, we have a black Tesla Model 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's a little basic, but I'm kind of inclined to use color as sort of a major clue here. I don't know.
We can do zoomies. We call them zoomies and enhancies. Okay. So if you need if you want to look at context clues of like stickers or window tints or things.
There's like an alien sticker on the WRX. It looks like.
See, there you go. I noticed that this is a Colorado plate. This is the only effing Subaru in all of Colorado without a proper bike rack on it.
Yeah,
and so they've wedged a cruiser bicycle. Of all things, into the trunk, right? Like it's got cruiser handlebars, right? So like, yeah, picking up on that. Yeah, okay.
This is a stolen
no.
bike to finance their vape habit.
Okay, so this is the silver. So this is also a Colorado plate.
Mm-hmm. They have the
Silver.
Mercedes-Benz of Littleton. Not all it's cracked up to be. I can say that as somebody who's been there. Yeah.
And that's yeah, so that's the badging. That's all it's a factory paint color. It looks almost like it could be a matte, but
it was matte. I took this picture.
Matte.
It was a matte paint color. This was a legit AMG.
Okay.
Yeah, they leaned into the matte with the AMG stuff. Like, I don't know, what, 6-7 years later than most people did. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then like nothing on the Tesla, like not even like plasti dip badges or anything, you know?
I mean, the black, it's gotta be the Batmobile one, right?
Yeah.
Like just so like process of elimination, I would just start there. Like that's gotta be the Batmobile one. I would say the other two are a little more, I guess it's not really that ambiguous because Spider-Man is red. The Avengers would be silver, right? I mean,
yeah.
That's kind of how my brain is sorting this out. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I think you're spot on. Yeah, absolutely Batmobile. The only other thing that I can think of for Batmobile would be like that kind of like Bruce Wayne mentality with the AMG.
Yeah.
Right. So I think maybe I'll make that my guess just to kind of like throw a different option out there.
Okay.
Yeah. Which then I guess like Avenger and Spidey, I don't know, like maybe Avenger for the Tesla because of like Iron Man's Jarvis stuff. And then Spidey for the Subaru because it's red. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we often lose this game when we go away from our gut instinct.
Yeah. I will talk myself out of correct answers so often.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep it simple, smooth brain. Colors explain it all.
I'm into it. Okay.
All right.
We have a Dave Don't Look folder. I've gone into the Dave Don't Look folder. Here we go. Here's the answer. All right.
Dave was right.
Oh my God.
Spidey up top on the WRX. You guys both got that right. But Avenger was on the Tesla.
And the Bruce Wayne. Okay.
And I think the I think the Avenger thing is maybe like an Elon Tony Stark nonsense thing, right? Because that was a thing for a while.
I mean, no, it's true. He was like Elon. I don't think he was in one of the Avenger movies, but he was in.
He was one of the Iron Man movies, right?
Or was it just one? Yeah, I think he was in one of the Iron Man movies. Yeah. I know. And Robert Downey Jr. Yeah, no, it's a crucial part of his whole thing. Yeah, no, that makes sense. If it had been Iron Man, I definitely right. No question. Yeah. But yeah, the Avengers that okay. And now that I think about it too, the last was the Batmobile even black in the most recent movie?
Oh, I don't know.
I feel like it definitely broadened my sort of mental model of what a Batmobile like could even be. So
yeah.
Okay. Learning experience.
No, this is the only time overthinking it has actually yielded anything. Yeah.
Yeah. He's right. Usually it is not helpful.
It looks like it was black too, but it definitely,
But not like a I am the night kind of black, like more just like, I didn't wash it for a while.
Totally.
Yeah, Batman has a lot of stuff going on, guys. Like, I don't have time to armor all this thing. Yeah.
Nice. Again, like Batmobile. Like, to me, the idea of putting a Batmobile vanity plate on a car that isn't black is that's the part that's hard to.
It is matte, and also I think that most people who get vanity plates are insane. Right, like we've joked for a long time.
And the story I told earlier certainly doesn't disagree. So
yeah.
I'm on this obscure website, and there's a bot, and he's my friend.
I love him.
he helps me make bad decisions.
Right.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
It all checks out. See?
Neither of us have vanity plates ourselves yet. I say that the one that I'm going to get is Werther's eventually for my LS460 because that's an old man car, right?
Okay. Is it
Yeah.
like kind of a butterscotch color too, or?
It's black, but yeah, and
Okay.
also I'm a candy like fiend, so yeah,
Okay.
there is that too. Yeah, but
Yeah.
and then Ian will never have a vanity plate. I cannot ever imagine you having a vanity plate, Ian.
My dumb lowered Volkswagen already tells everyone everything they need to know about me, so I don't need to broadcast anything further.
Do you not have the like Euro plate?
No, I don't.
Oh, that's the one VW trope you don't fall into, Ian.
Oh, there's a lot. There are a lot of
maybe
VW
dating
tropes
myself.
I don't vape.
Oh, okay. Well,
I don't have a flat brim hat.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We got our
Um,
eyes on you.
It's fine.
You're not the most popular guy at the Volkswagen Club, are you?
No, and I'm always like, I've had this thing forever. It's whatever. It's an old Volkswagen. And they're like, no, it's not. Anyway.
Yeah.
We are way over on time, but do you want to play? We have one more game that we can play.
Yeah.
It's not a license plate game. This is actually one from our archive. So we did this one a long time ago. We used to play a game on the show all the time. We played it occasionally called FMK Cars, which is basically fuck, marry, kill, but with cars instead of people because we're nice.
Yep.
And we did one. I went into my archive and searched for Tesla, and this was one that popped up, and I thought it was apt. So we're doing it, and you have no choice in the matter. This one's called. It's like, what are rivets anyway, man? Cars with an impaired executive catch. You are the driver of these cars, but the famous automaker CEO is your passenger and is fucked up. So the idea here is you're going to assign fuck, marry, kill to each car. F means you drive it for a day.
Yeah.
M means it's your new daily driver, and K means it's going to go to the crusher.
Okay.
With an inebriated CEO still in the car.
And what is the last modified date on this text file that you have, Ian? Or
it was like April of 2022, I think.
So, okay. So the Elon that we have that I assume will come up in this game is not that different than the Elon we have today. This wasn't like the 2014 Elon.
Well, no, but what's funny about this is that it was very clear that I know exactly what we were talking about by the catch that is in this.
Okay.
And everyone here is going to remember the exact incident that I'm talking about. All right.
Okay.
All right. So again, you are the driver of these cars, but the famous automaker CEO is your passenger and is fucked up. The first one, Tesla Model S P100D. Elon Musk is high on jazz cigarettes. This is from, I believe, when he went on Joe Rogan and smoked a joint on the air, which I had forgotten about until I read this. And I was like, oh, yeah, that happened. Okay, so that's number one. The next one is a Koenigsegg, a Jera R.
Okay.
And Christian von Koenigsegg is on mushrooms. Sounds entertaining.
Yeah.
And then the last one is a Corvette ZR1. We'll say it's the C7. Bob Lutz has had way too much cough syrup.
Bob Lutz on the syrup.
Bob Lutz on syrup just is like the funniest thing to me. And I obviously, I read this and I cracked myself up because I had forgotten this existed.
That is okay. Okay, so kill shouldn't be a big surprise. I'm killing the Tesla.
Okay,
sure.
That Tesla's going straight to the crusher.
Yeah, you're closing that tab. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the resale value is you might as well, probably.
Right. Yeah.
Not to mention various other benefits to society by getting that vehicle and its occupants off the road. Okay.
Fixing problems, Ed, on the Apex Adjacent podcast. Okay.
So I am going to fuck the Corvette.
Okay.
I'm only going to drive it for a day. And the reason is I've hung out with Bob Lutz before.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. I actually spent like 3 hours with him at his house one time. Kind of.
Oh, snap.
Very, very strange set of circumstances. I had gotten an advanced copy of his book. I think it was Car Guys versus Bean Counters.
yeah.
And he actually calls me out by name and he calls me the editor of The Truth About Cars, which is anything but, or something like that, like some kind of backhanded thing. And someone had given me his personal email address, which was like, you could never have guessed it and whatever. And I emailed him and I was like, hey man, like, if you wanted to like say something, like you could have just, you could say something, right? Like we could have done this like gentleman sort of like a thing. I don't know. I kind of figured out an appeal to his like sort of, his gentlemanly sort of side. And
Right.
It took a minute. He didn't get back right away, but was just eventually he did. And he was like, yeah, just come next time you're in Detroit, just like come over and we'll hang out. And I was like, and I'll do an interview. And so, so I spent like, it wasn't 3 hours, like over 2 hours, 2.5 hours hanging out and like seeing his garage and interviewing him and stuff. And anyway, Bob is a fascinating character. Really interesting guy. I feel like at this age, I would just be bothering him. I feel like we've had our like precious moment together.
Mm-hmm.
And like it would be fun to like sort of hang out with him one more time, like go for, drive around with him in a vet for a day. And then, our relationship has like already contained a lot of like, fun and weirdness and ups and downs, let's say. So
Right.
I feel like we've already done enough. Whereas Christian Going Koenigsegg, I've never met before. And I've heard from my friend and the co-host of the Autonicast, Alex Roy, has been the opportunity to get to know him a little bit and says nothing but the most positive things. And like Alex is a very positive and warm guy, but like when he talks about Christian von Koenigsegg, like a certain light goes into his eye. And so I would love, like, maybe I'm making a mistake. I don't know what I'm getting into. This is definitely a devil you don't know decision.
I would make the same decision fully.
I think you've chosen quite well.
Yeah.
I just feel like I know I've had enough Elon in my life. I feel like I probably had just about enough Bob Lutz.
But not on the syrup.
Sprinkle. Yeah.
Not on the syrup.
Let's see what life has in store for us.
Yeah.
No, I
like
think I think you've chosen exactly correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. No. As brilliant as Christian is, I can't even imagine where his mind would go on mushrooms, because like this is where it goes just normally. He's like, hey, what if a car had no transmission? Fuck it. Right? I feel like that also, Christian von Koenigsegg seems like an interesting guy alone. I think you're absolutely right. Christian von Koenigsegg on mushrooms would be a particularly interesting guy. And I have very little doubt that we would find some really interesting things to talk about. Yeah, exactly.
I like it.
Exactly.
I like it.
Yeah. Well done, Ed. Yeah.
Well, getting back to this was good decision making, obviously. Bad decision making. You did this thing. You did this show. So
this is fun. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, we had a blast having you on. Absolutely.
Yes. What should the people do if they need more Edward Niedermeyer in their life?
So you can find me my personal blog, and which is really it's more for me than anyone else. And on Blue Sky, it's both Niedermeyer.io. This is one of the things I just love about Blue Sky. Don't have to memorize different things. That's my blog. That's my handle. I'm also, and we haven't really talked a lot about this. It'll be more in the coming weeks, but I'll just say it now. I'm putting on a summit around autonomous vehicles, and we're gonna have some really exciting people there. It's happening on April 2nd. It's called the Ride AI Conference, or Ride AI Summit. Excuse me. It's like I said, there's only 300 spots. So if you're like super into autonomous vehicles, and you want to be at the like kind of the event, I would say get your ticket now, because once we start announcing like the speakers, they will go fast. Yeah, there it is. It's the website. So you can find out more there and sign, get tickets. Listen, we've got a podcast about which I have to produce another episode for. I just realized. I mean, it's great. It's really interesting, but I just remember that I have to do something for that. Anyway, so yeah, that's coming up in April. Stay tuned as far as that goes. But yeah, all of my updates and then yeah, random brain farts on Blue Sky. So
yeah, and absolutely, you got to plug the book.
Yeah.
Guess whose library it's in?
Tesla Motors. Yeah, it came out in 2019. I'm really proud of it because I think I think you can read it today. And it was the challenge writing it. It was like, I knew the story wasn't over, and I knew I had to find a way to try and make it something that was worth reading years later. And I actually think it's not a perfect book, but I think I did. There is some you will find some interesting stuff there, unless you follow the story really, really, really closely, in which case it'll all be stuff you already know. But but yeah, check out Ludicrus, the Unvarnished Story of Tesla Motors, and then it's probably a year out, but I am currently working on Elon Take the Wheel, which is sort of a similar look at Tesla's work in autopilot and full self-driving. So keep an eye out on that. And yeah, in the meantime, I will be online at niedermeyer.io.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
For everyone, for our listeners, do all of that. Also, send us your cars show us your cars at the end of the year. You have until, what do we say, like December 20th or something like that?
Yeah, we do a year-end listener special where people just send us their cars and we just talk about them on our show for as long as we can. So yeah, send us your cars, 720-515-1391. Continue texting us bizarre vanity plates. Yeah, you can DM us on Insta and Blue Sky. And because we're not on the Do Everything app anymore. I do love how you consistently called it by its full Christian name.
If you're gonna make me not call it Twitter, I'm definitely calling it X the Everything app every time.
Right.
Yeah.
I love it. I do all my banking on there. That's the only thing I do on there. Just my banking.
Oh, Ian, I have news for you.
Oh no. Everybody, thank you so much. Edward, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Like I said, yeah, this has been so much fun.
Great. Thank you. We love you. Goodbye.